All right. Let's have a moment of silent prayer or private reflection. Would you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do I have a motion for approval of agenda for this session?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Eric Rowan,
Yes.
Lisa Ramon,
Yes.
Kyle Niederman.
Yes.
Number 3, discussion items, business services, preliminary audit wrap-up, and with auditors from Heinfeld, Meach and Company, PC.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, board members. Auditors from Heinfeld Meach are here with us today to present preliminary audit information for the district's fiscal year 2024 audit. Michael Lazan with Heinfeld Meach is here with his team, and he will present what we have up to this point, as this is still an ongoing audit for fiscal year 2024.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to the board for having us out here today. As Mike mentioned, we are the independent auditors hired by the district to perform the yearly audit. And so I'll kind of get into a little bit of what that represents. And obviously, as questions come up, just please feel free to ask. With me today are a couple team members. You can see behind the curtain over here. Robin Christ is staff in the audit, and Cameron Kolb, also a Lake Havasu graduate, is leading the audit. And we also have a team member, Shauna Brewster, who is working remotely on the audit as well. And so the 4 of us are out here for this week, and then we were previously on site in September for kind of more of the compliance side of things. Like I said, we are the independent auditors hired by the district. This is what our firm does. We primarily work with school districts, municipalities, governments all over the state of Arizona, a little bit in New Mexico as well. And so we were hired by the district to perform 3 different audits, and they're very distinct and unique as far as what they require. The primary purpose of what is being out here for is the financial audit, and that's getting a sense of the numbers, agreeing what's being reported as revenues, expenses, cash, capital assets, all these different areas. What do you think of as a traditional financial audit? Ensuring that the numbers are materially free from misstatement due to error or fraud. And it sounds like we are on the right track to give what's called an unmodified opinion, which is the highest opinion we can give for a financial statement audit. The second part of the audit we're out here for is federal compliance. And so because the district receives and expends more than $750,000 in federal awards, and especially with some of the monies that have come through the last few years as far as the COVID funds, the district has been well in excess of that amount. And so for this fiscal year, we tested 2 federal programs, and I'll get into some more details on that as well. And the third audit we're engaged to do is what's called the Uniform System of Financial Records Compliance Questionnaire, the USFR, also known as the USUFR. This is the state puts out a questionnaire every year. There's over 200 individual questions. In fact, if you go through all the subsections of the statutes, it gets way more, almost close to 1,000 different questions that we're looking at as far as determining compliance with various state laws. And so things that are outside of the realm of a normal financial audit or a federal compliance, also called the Uniform Guidance Audit. This has to do more with state compliance in the areas of attendance, student activities, auxiliary transportation, kind of touching almost every area of the district. Things that are, like I said, more outside the area of what's considered normally a financial audit. Like I said, we were here in September of 2024. We had 3 members on site for 4 days, and primarily what we did was USFR kind of compliance, budgets, attendance, IGAs, cooperatives, bond disbursements, transportation, just kind of touching a lot of different areas in the district. And then this visit we're on site here for, we finished up a few other areas as well. For federal compliance, we have been working on that in both visits as well. The two grants we were testing this year, the first one is the ESSER, or Education Stabilization Fund, and this is the round 3 of the COVID money. It's the wrap-up. Everything has to be spent or committed by September of '24. So this is kind of the tail end of that activity. And then we also tested this year Title I, which is a grant that we typically have to rotate in once every 3 years. And so as far as what we're looking for, the federal government puts out a compliance supplement every year, and they tell us what they want us to test. And so for these different federal programs, we're looking at allowable activities, payroll and disbursements, eligibility, matching, equipment, and there's also this catch-all called special testing provisions, where we looked at things like cohorts for Title I, and we also looked at wage rate compliance for how you spent the education stabilization funds, having to do more with construction. Financial statement areas. In September, we focused primarily on some of the transactional type stuff, disbursements, payroll, but we were also, because we were later in the audit, we were also able to get some of the final numbers for accounts payable and accrued payroll. And then we also, on this visit, is primarily, the October visit is primarily the financial related areas. So a lot of time with Mike, spent talking about year-end numbers, working with Teresa and Cash and Bank, and working with Kelly on Cash and County. So we're kind of getting into those final larger type numbers. So before I get into some of what we found as far as exceptions so far, are there any questions? Okay, great. Okay, so kind of going with what we found as far as USFR, this is more of the, like I said, more of the compliance section, to where this is where you typically have most of your findings. If you're going to have findings, especially in the area of attendance. When we do, for our school districts, we do a once a year training for all of our school districts, and we talk about what are the top 10 finding areas, and attendance is always number 1, because it's the most times where you have different people touching a transaction, and the most potential for errors, because maybe the parent doesn't quite fill out their sign in, sign out log correctly, or maybe the attendance clerk, types in the wrong entry or withdrawal time. And so this is typically where some of the findings happen. And so we have, for 1 of 10 entries reviewed, the proof of the Arizona residency was not maintained. For 2 of 10 entries reviewed, the district did not maintain legal documents used for enrollment. This is where we have to verify that the student's legal name matches their name within your attendance system. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that because those documents weren't kept. And then we also had several partial day miscalculations reviewed. So we look at a sample of students and their sign-in, sign-out logs to see if you're correctly calculating their attendance for that day. Doesn't actually affect your funding, but it affects something else as far as if you have too many, students are absent for most of the day. So 3 elementary, 5 high school, and 1 CTED, we noticed some partial day miscalculations. And then finally, for the annual financial report, the AFR was submitted in the prior year financials, but there's a timeliness requirement for submission to the CSS that was not met. And then there were some variances in budgeted expenditures for federal project funds. Nothing significant, just something to note for the future.
I see several partial day miscalculations. Out of how many records did you check? The other ones were like 1 of 10.
Oh, so I think it was elementary was 3 of 10, high school was unfortunately 5 of 5, and CTED was 1 of 5.
The elementary is actually middle school in there
Oh,
also.
sorry.
There's a middle school, there were 2 elementary and 1 middle school.
Yes, okay, perfect.
Thank
See, I appreciate that, thank you. Something to note that for information technology, we actually had a reduction in the number of findings noted over the prior year. In the prior year, we had an issue noted where some people had more access than maybe they should have. And then in fiscal '24, we reviewed the same access controls and noticed that the employees who had maybe too much access in fiscal '23 had their access reduced to an appropriate level. So that was good to see. Also, the second bullet here talks about software programs, not including some of the things such as multi-factor authentication, lock screens. And in fact, for several of, I think now there's only one district system which does not have multi-factor authentication, which is an improvement over the prior year as well. And I think that's In Touch, and that just may be a vendor issue where they're still having to figure out how to do that. And then also, the disaster recovery plan did not include all the required elements, and there was not a test performed in fiscal '24. But from what I understand, there's already a new plan kind of being waiting to be approved. So that might address that finding. Okay. Sorry, take a little drink of water. The next two are two findings we noted for federal compliance. Sorry, I shouldn't say USFR at the top. I should say federal compliance. For Title I, there was one student who they withdrew from the district, and because of the way their code was withdrawn, they should have been removed from the graduation report. And not counted against the district, essentially. So it kind of counted against you because the student was still included on your graduation report, cohort report. I can give you more details on that too if there's any questions on that. The second one is for the ESSER program. This is the COVID funds. When you're using those funds for a construction project, you're required to get what's called wage rate certifications. And those have to be done on a weekly basis. And so in this case, the vendor did not submit on a weekly basis those required logs, essentially showing that they're paying meeting the minimum of a required hourly rate set by the federal government for each area for when you're using federal funds. And typically, it's a wage higher than what would be normally paid in your area for those types of, the type of work. Yeah.
And so if we're using a third-party vendor for some of those projects, it is still our job as a district to oversee that they are submitting those weekly reports?
Yeah, so the vendor is required to submit the weekly report to the district, and the district is required to review that weekly report and then ensure that the rate paid is at least meets or exceeds the requirement of the federal government.
Okay, thank you.
And this is kind of a more, I will say that this one is more of a common finding we've noted within districts that typically don't receive federal dollars for construction projects, because that's not normally like Havasu or other districts. Typically, the money you're getting for construction projects is more of state money or local bond money, in which you're just going to pay the vendor for the job and let them take care of the wages. So for a lot of districts, this was something that they didn't even necessarily know about. And so we've noted this finding at several districts as well. So, few items that are still outstanding as of October 30th. Actually, the second bullet we can basically cross off because I was able to get all the information I needed for revenue request. We are still waiting on information for capital assets, though. And hopefully that will come this week. So what's next? So we will be here through tomorrow, working through what we have gotten so far and making additional requests, finalizing our test work over both financial, federal, and USFR compliance areas. The annual comprehensive financial report, also known as the ACFR, has a due date of December 31st, 2024, and we don't anticipate any issues with meeting that deadline. The other two reports that we are required to prepare and file is the USFR and the single audit reporting package. Those have due dates of March 31st, 2025, and again, we don't anticipate any concerns with meeting that deadline either. And I do want to say a special thank you to Mike, all of the different departments, finance, HR, grants, et cetera. Like I said, we kind of touch almost every area of the district, and we appreciate everyone's help in getting the audit done. I know this is kind of a busy week for everybody, busy 2 weeks that we're out here, and all the prep work that goes into it. And I do appreciate everyone's effort and kindness, and including us in your festivities tomorrow. So thank you.
Any discussion?
Kyle, did you have any questions to ask?
I do not.
The only thing I would just add is, once again, thanks. I've been through enough audits, both with the school district and with other districts, to know that it's like playing whack-a-mole with things that come up, especially related with like attendance and those types of things. And I know, as we've talked about past audits, this one has many fewer than I think the ones we've had in the past, and things that, there was movement and problems we've had before. There's always areas that are going to come up with them, each term, and I'm very thankful for the way you guys are proactive to address those issues.
Agreed. And I noticed that nothing came up with like some of the clubs and different activities at the schools this year. So, and it has in the past. So I'm glad to see that those problems have been ironed out.
Yeah, I think the thank you extends to the school sites as well, because they definitely are a big part of what happens and what moves through the system, and then what gets looked at, and my team and all the other departments who oversee it and try to fix everything before the transaction is then complete.
I guess I did have one more question. With the disaster recovery plan, can you tell me a little bit about the elements that you wanted to see that weren't there?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm going to have somebody pull it up right now, and
Okay.
I'll give you some of the elements that we're missing.
Okay.
And typically what this is, so it's the anticipation that if a disaster occurs and the school's IT systems are wiped out, here's a step-by-step guide for how you could go through and then restore the system. And basically, you're required to test that plan at least once a year. And you don't test it by intentionally taking down your network. It's basically like a walkthrough, a practice. What would happen? Could we access our backups? It's kind of a theoretical exercise with some practical elements. So I'll let Robin get up here and talk too.
Hi, so I'm the one who looked at the disaster recovery plan. So some of the items that were not included that we'd like to see. Lists of vital records required for recovery efforts are not included. Any escalation procedures needed of how to respond to these emergencies and how to tell when a problem becomes a disaster. And then also just that plan maintenance of being tested yearly was not done. So that's included as an element in this case.
Thank you.
I'd like to also extend. There we go. I'd also like to extend thanks to you and your company. I know you've been with us for a while, and it's always been, very good work, very thorough work, and I know you work very well with our district employees well, and thanks to you guys as well. Couldn't do it without you. Are there any announcements? Then I will take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
we are adjourned.